Welcome to the exploration of consciousness.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Matt Presti back with another episode of the Exploration of Consciousness, the TEC series. And it is my honor and privilege to welcome today Mr. Jason Verbelli. Jason, how you doing, bud?
I am doing fantastic. Very happy to be here and wanted to thank you for having me and thank all the listeners for giving this information time.
Right on, right on. Well, how about a little background on who Jason Verbelli is for people who may not know?
Cool. Well, my name is Jason, and I have been an independent researcher and experimenter for about 17 years. And I had gotten into alternative energy and really looking in the opposite direction of which authority is pointing. So if they're telling us to look over there, I'm looking in the opposite direction. If we're using so-called fossil fuels, I'm trying to look for alternatives and trying to study and meet with the most credible inventors and people who might have something to offer that can benefit humanity. So that has been my deal, is trying to travel around, meet with people, and separate the wheat from the chaff. And in my search, I have found quite a few different topics, of which I have put together on flyers after being canceled on different platforms. So apparently it's a type of information that isn't really supported, and there are people who don't want this type of topics to be discussed. So that interests me even further, and if it's valid, it can really help people, and that's what we should be doing. So it's either complete nonsense or the most important stuff in humanity, no in between, and it turns out there's some validity to this stuff. So I'm just a guy who's interested in trying to help, and if I can leave a few breadcrumbs, then so be it. Oh, mute. Got that, Mike?
Yeah, sorry. I'm still new at this, man. Still getting back into the swing of things. It's been a few years since I've been into the podcasting realm. But yeah, you and I met by email, talked by phone. You did some voiceover work for some of the Secret of Light series parts here and there. And we finally got to meet in 2011 at the Tesla Tech Conference in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And I think that was at the Embassy Suites, if I'm right. And well, before we get into this story, why don't you briefly, I know you told me from the past that you were into martial arts. What particular style did you use to, or do you currently study?
What's your style? In 1997, I was fortunate enough to visit China at the Shaolin Temple, the original 1,500-year-old temple in the Songshan Mountains. And that was my martial art of choice, was the stand-up Sanshao boxing, Sanda boxing, and the Shaolin Gong Fu. But everything ends up on the ground, so you got to know some jujitsu too. But that was my main interest, and I visited China for a month. I stayed at the Shaolin Temple for about 11 days and got to bond with these monks. And two of the monks, who are actual brothers, have started a temple outside of China in London, the Shaolin Temple UK. and had visited them a couple times since they had established their temple there. And I could be working out a little bit more, of course, but that's my deal. So I'm not an expert by any means, but I like to dabble.
Well, it was really cool. I did 9 years in ninjutsu, very young age, 13 to in my early 20s, and just self-study, but it was still rigorous. And it's interesting because a lot of people I meet that are into, whether it be conspiracy, alternative energy, alternative history, they all have sort of a definite common link, and that is a study of martial arts at some point in their lives. And this just clicked to me this morning, and I was thinking about it. I'm like, Jason told me that he was into, the Shaolin boxing and things of that nature back in 2011 when we met. And I'm like, then there's David Whitehead, Josh Reed, just on with him. He's martial artist. So many people who are into the conspiracy research are martial artists. And what clicked in my head was maybe it's because we lost our fear. By taking martial arts, you sort of almost conquer a fear inside you, that where people who maybe don't have that training or background are afraid to confront things like conspiracy. Maybe it's a little bit something that puts them off, but that's just some thought that came to my head today, and I thought I'd share that. But speaking of when we met, back to the Embassy Suites in Albuquerque, New Mexico, that was for the Tesla Tech Conference, and Ote and I met at Dale Ponds in 2011, and we hung out and got to feel the love coming from the Dynasphere, But anyways, for what it's worth, got to meet you guys, and it was a pretty cool conference nonetheless. But there's an interesting story of I think we were in the room hanging out, and there's this room next to us, and somebody apparently called the security guys because they smelled something. They ended up shaking down this family next to the room next to us, and
2 or 3 families.
Yeah.
we were in this corner room, and the security had knocked on all of these other doors except for the one room where we were drinking and talking and philosophizing.
Oh yeah,
and,
yeah.
It was hilarious. And then
so we're all hiding out in there, and I'm like, is it safe to leave? We're peeking out the door. Is it safe to leave? And there's 2 families on each side of our room getting shaken down in the hallway in their pajamas, man.
This is outrageous. What is this? They said, we have a 30-mile hike tomorrow. What are we waking us up?
So anyways, that was a fond memory that I thought I'd just bring back into the fray. But all right. So anyways, yeah, some cool stuff. When is it that you actually, Jason, I got to say, folks, he's an old school researcher in the alternative energy fields, and one of the very first people who ever uploaded a Walter Russell related video with, in particular, showcasing the book, A New Concept of the Universe. How many hits did you have on that video before YouTube shit canned your channel?
There's at least 250,000.
Yeah. So it's going back a ways. When did you upload that? Like 2008 or 9, somewhere way back in the day.
2009, or that was before we had met. That was before the first Tesla Technology Conference I visited in 2010, when I met John Searl for the first time.
Yeah, okay.
But I uploaded all that Walter Russell material and helped to try to popularize his work, because I thought he was one of the most brilliant people I had ever encountered when I first saw the new concept of the universe. There's the periodic chart, and all of his different perspectives is obviously something valid and worthwhile to be applying.
Absolutely. And so when we met, you had already been acquainted with Searl in 2011. How did this unfold for you? Because, you've been there with the Institute, the SEG company. What's your role in that, and how did you come to discover that? Because I never did hear you explain how exactly you got drawn into that.
I was, again, being interested in alternative energy, doing constant research and searching on the internet and through books. I found this device that's like a homopolar motor. I've never seen anything like this before. It had 12 orbiting magnets around it. And this thing just took off all of a sudden, just spinning through the Lorentz force. I didn't know what I was looking at first, but I had never seen anything move like this before. Instantly knew that, okay, this is something different. I got to see what this is. So I emailed the uploaders, who happened to be Fernando Morris and John Searl himself, and part of the team. So I got in contact with them. You know how much easier it is to contact a scientist than it is a celebrity? It's amazing. They email you right back. You can communicate and talk about all sorts of stuff. So that's what I did is over the course of years, from 2007 on, was emailing them and trying to communicate what I was looking at and the details of the claims of the technology. And again, I'm like, this sounds too good to be true. This is either a complete nonsense or it's the most important thing humanity can focus on. So in trying to dismantle it and invalidate it, I started validating it. Everything that I was looking into is like, wait a minute, this is sound. This is physics and electrical engineering. So I met up with them in 2010, John Searl and Fernando Morris, and others who were working to try to film him at the time and popularize his work again. And he had come out of the woodwork after being silent and suppressed for quite some time. So 2010 Tesla Technology Conference was the first time he had come public again, and everybody was interested. I got a chance to meet him and become officially a part of the team. And I dedicated myself to get these people the funding they deserve in order to validate or invalidate themselves. Let's put it to the test and see what happens. And since then, in 2010, I have moved here to San Diego, built a magnetic laboratory, an 8-foot magnetizer, took 2.5 years to build, built up this facility to be able to do this work, to rebuild John Searl's technology, which ultimately can power homes and cars and clean the biosphere. Oh, muted.
There we go again.
Okay.
So yeah, that's really cool. It's a calling then to you that led you to his work. And for those not familiar with John Searl, can you just give a little background on him and why he became a scientist that was basically buried, his research, things like that?
John Searl was a man who was born in the early 30s, and he was left in an orphanage to fend for himself, beaten until he was deaf in one ear and mostly deaf in the other ear. And they figured, well, he's just a little deaf kid, so why bother teaching him and bothering with him anyway? Screw him. So they just left this little kid to himself, and he had reoccurring dreams from age 6 to 12 about hopscotch squares and about a ring of hay and on fire, and him being in the center of it and just being safe. So he translated these dreams into almost 100 books that he called the Law of Squares, which is based on an ancient form of math like Sudoku, based on magic squares from Lo Shu, which hasn't been used for about 5,000 years. And he uses it like a calculator to determine the quantities of materials and their atomic arrangements. And he says it is like atomic energy in a random state that is transposed to an ordered state. And by doing that, you can generate electricity. So he was such a savant and a prodigy that at a teenager, at 14, 15 years old, he was hired as a supervisor in the largest industrial electric plant that ran all of London. And it was at British Rewind Electric Repairs Limited that he worked there as a supervisor and was telling all of his coworkers about these dreams and his device and his energy. They're calling him crazy. So his boss came to him and said, look, people are talking, either leave, stop talking, or prove it. So he said, well, I can't stop talking about it. I love my job. I'm not leaving, so I'll prove it. So he used the company resources and everything at his availability with the engineers and the factory workers, with everything to his availability. And he wrote down shop notes, gave them to the people. They made these parts for him over the course of months in trial and error until they were to his liking. He modified a magnetizer, magnetized these things, brought everything home, assembled them, and tested it out. He just wanted to power his lights in his shop at his house. So he plugged in a light. It started spinning and cooling down. He plugged in an iron. It started spinning faster and cooled down even more. He plugged in a cooker. It spun even faster, cooled down so much, it went critical, superconductive. And he said it lifted off of his table to the ceiling. Nobody taught him that isn't supposed to happen. So he tried grabbing onto this thing. His hands electrostatically stuck to it. He couldn't let go. His hands were freezing. His landlady came in, started beating it with a broom, poured hot water on his hands. This thing started coming back down to the table like a magnet and superconductor after it heats up, like the Meissner effect, but in reverse. So there are scientific principles here to describe what this man was experimenting with. But every time he tried using this device as a generator to practically power things, it wanted to lift off his table. So he attached a 60-ton shear pin to it and a cable, saying, okay, if this thing wants to fly away, then I'm going to hold it down. Well, what happens if you hold a basketball underwater? You know, like it fights back with you with the equal amount of force as the buoyancy around it. And so this thing, he held it with 60 tons of force. He ramped up the power, trying to power something. It snapped the cable. 60 tons, blasted through his ceiling, poked a hole in his roof. And he said this thing was glowing silently over his house. Birds fell to the ground, dead. People's tiles in their roofs were rippling. And everybody's radio sets in their town and their house came on whether they were plugged in or not, full blast. Something out of like Close Encounters of the Third Kind, you know?
Right, right.
And then he said this thing just took off, never to be seen again. So he built another one, and another one, and another one. Every time he tried to use it as a generator, it would be lost until he learned how to add a dielectric material like nylon 66, which regulated the electric currents and allowed him to use it as a generator up to a certain point before it went critical again. So he was powering his house unbeknownst to the electric company that he worked for. And power wasn't going to his house on the grid for as many years as he was working there. And they went to his house. His disgruntled wife let them in when he was out of town giving a lecture in it's either Zurich or Germany or somewhere. He was gone for 3 days, and his wife burned his belongings on the front lawn with police supervision. The electric company came in, ripped the device out of his wall where he had it plastered in, and they took him to court later claiming that he was stealing their electricity because he built this thing on company property. So they thought it was their property. He built it with company resources. You're on company time working for us, and you built this thing on our property. That's ours. All the electricity that it generated, whether you connected it to the grid or whatever, you stole electricity from us. If you made your own electricity, that's stealing from us, whatever. So they took him to court. The judge dismissed the case because they were not cooperative. They refused to bring in the device they confiscated, lost it.
Yeah.
Same old conspiracy theory again.
Right.
So which makes it harder to validate because they kept it. But the BBC filmed this man weekly for almost a year back in like 1967, 68. And they have an archive of the list of their episodes dealing with this man, which was only on local access TV back then. They didn't have digital anything. It was all analog VHS tapes and stuff. So I contacted the BBC over 8 weeks, and then they said, yes, the footage is in our archives, but it's not on the shelf. Don't know what happened to it. Great. So it exists in there. So the footage is there that BBC did. So this is not just, up in the air. It's just, there's documentation to show that this guy did this. He was investigated by different organizations, and and tried to duplicate it for decades since, but has never gotten the funding and resources because everybody was trying to duplicate it as a hobby. But now we are trying to do this as a commercial venture to actually apply it for generators and to help people and like get off of oil, gas, nukes, and solar, geothermal, wind, and every conventional form of energy we use today. So that's how important this is.
That's amazing. You know, it rings true across so many inventors' stories of their lives. Very similar events, different characters, different times, different circumstances, but usually always ends with them being put under either a gag order, having their invention seized, being told they're doing things against the grain, and, for instance, stealing something that they're making copious amounts of without the need to steal. Brings to mind Wilhelm Reich when all his laboratory was seized and burned by the FBI back in the 50s and early 60s, whenever that actually occurred. All his research materials, everything. So there is a big fear to the whole idea of alternative energy production. And as we know, they're guardians, the Neil deGrasse's, the Michio Kaku's, who you had met, Mushi Kaku. And perhaps you can share that story with us and what it was like to meet him and try to see where his mind was on, you know, alternative explanations for electrical production.
Hey, this guy. It was in 2008 at the Exploratorium in San Francisco, the Palace of Fine Arts, before it was relocated. And Exploratorium is a huge warehouse with scientific experiments and stuff. It's like just one of the greatest places on earth. It's fun for kids and adults to learn about everything there. So Michio Kaku was doing a book signing and talking about his book, The Physics of the Impossible, when it first came out. And my dad and stepmom got tickets because they were fascinated by the guy. And I showed up, and I was the first person in line when his lecture ended so that I could take a picture with him and I could talk to him for a few minutes and see what, you know, this guy's one of the smartest mans in the world. Gotta see what he's got to say. So turns out he's not so smart. Nope. And he's a complete denialist. He said he personally investigated every free energy claim and device himself.
Sure.
Every one of them. And it's all impossible. But buy his book called The Physics of the Impossible. And it'll tell you how it's possible.
Right.
What the fuck? You just said it's impossible. What the hell? So then I stood next to this guy grilling him for like 15 minutes in front of everybody when he's like trying to sign books. He was like, okay, please get away from me, bro. And I'm like, I was the only person to get a picture with him that day. And I should have worn a t-shirt that said, I'm with stupid, with an arrow. So I photoshopped that on my actual shirt when I was.
I saw that. That's great.
But he's just a total denial, and he just makes up things as he goes. And it was disheartening to learn one by one that once you meet your heroes, you're going to get new heroes after that.
Yeah, it's truly amazing. You know, the Neil deGrasse Tyson's, it seems to be more about ego than it is about actual science these days, especially, I don't know if you caught Neil's meltdown over the COVID jab when he was on that interview. Wasn't that priceless? Yeah, it just tells you where their loyalties lie and how truly unscientific these people really are. And again, their front man put there to throw us all off the actual scent of the actual truth. And when you came to get into the Searl work, and you started to, you know, as you said, get the laboratory going. Let's go from there. Where when you relocated to San Diego, where'd you relocate from, and what were your first steps in getting to know the guys and them inviting you in, you know, to take part in this research?
Well, since I had done so much advocating for years, I started a MySpace page for John Searl, and that's how far back.
I remember
Date
MySpace.
myself here. Oh my god! So I was doing, and then I upload on Facebook, on YouTube, on all of the websites I could possibly do, and then went to expos, and then bought the DVDs of the John Searl story when it came out in 2008. I bought 10 of those, handed them out to everybody that I could at different universities to try to get people to just pay attention. I relocated from the San Francisco Bay Area, and I was born in San Francisco, grew up in a little beach town, Pacifica, and then moved to San Diego years later. So that was to dedicate myself to these efforts. And well, I was the only employee, and I've been the only employee of the company because I earned my way to, after years of advocating and showing care and dedication. And I wouldn't be doing this if it wasn't something that I thought was wholeheartedly valid. I wouldn't be promoting something that is anything fake or esoteric or even new agey. I try to get rid of the esoteric nonsense, root your feet on the ground before we can have our head in the clouds, and let's get real. And in order to do that, you have to test things professionally in an environment that will allow that. And you have to build that environment and infrastructure, and that costs money in reality. So that's the real deal. And that's why I moved here, and to get real.
Yeah, there's a great photo that I snagged off the net of you around all this machinery. It's probably, I don't know, 5 or 6 years old. And I'm like, man, it's really cool that you've gone into this. So tell me, what is the basis of the Searl, the SEG Magnetics device? Let's say the prime mover, the prime device that you're working on. It seems relatively similar to like a stator, for instance, like something you'd find in a washing machine, or, you know, where that magnetic spin is what is the basis of the motion? And is it actual motion, or is it just a moving magnetic field? What is, you know, a little bit of background on the actual device that you're trying to work toward, you know, getting out to the world?
Okay. So John Searl developed a magnetization process unlike anyone else in the world. The whole world knows magnets, north and south. The entire industry, all they do is they use high capacitive discharge to saturate a metal to make domains, and they just zap a metal as hard as they can, and they make a magnet. That's all the world knows. John Searl developed a way to finesse it more like a tuning fork. It's like combining cymatics with magnetization as an analogy. So you're accounting for many other factors and timings and frequencies, which ultimately imprints a magnetic waveform into the magnetic field, of which there is no scientific literature. So when in rotation, physical rotation, this magnetic waveform repeats as an AC subcarrier, sine wave, and a signal. So not just flipping of poles with magnets, north, south, but you actually have magnetic signal of one wavelength. It's not a sound, it's a undulation of a magnetic field at a specific frequency. And it ultimately, in the whole system, because magnets themselves are a means to facilitate electron flow and motion, but electrons are not ball particles orbiting a nucleus. That model was outdated by the 1950s. So sure. So this ultimately allows for the absorption of surrounding energy as an open system. You're dealing with the internal kinetic energy of electrons themselves, cycling through the unit like a hydroelectric dam, but on the subatomic quantum scale. So you have fermions, you have electricity in a random state, fluctuating everywhere, and it's attracted to the core, which is made of neodymium, rare earth lanthanide. There's an extra valence in the atom of the neodymium of a rare earth lanthanide that's easily stripped, and you can tell because the material oxidizes in the air easily, so it exchanges electrons. So that is the core of the device. The electrons are attracted to the core like water in a reservoir. And then the dielectric layer, like the nylon or the Teflon, acts as the regulator or the dam wall to prevent the flow. But in a hydroelectric dam, there's channels, and then the water flows through those channels, and then there's a turbine in those channels which spin. So the amount of water flowing through the turbine determines how much it spins in front of a coil, and then you generate electricity. But in this case, instead of water flowing through it, it's the internal kinetic energy itself being absorbed, cycling, being output, and then looping back in. So the prime mover is the sun. So the energy has to come from somewhere. So this is an open system. So abiding by the first law of thermodynamics, the temperature drops as you extract energy from your surroundings, because you're taking energy from your surroundings. Therefore, there's less energy there. So therefore, the total amount of energy drops. It's not transferring heat, like rubbing your hands like Mr. Miyagi and putting against the Peltier device and then transferring the heat like the Carnot cycle. It's dealing with the internal kinetic energy of electrons itself. It's not dealing with heat. It's dealing with a lowering of total temperature of the total amount of energy. So these magnetic waveforms resonate with the energy. It absorbs all wavelengths except for the one it's operating on, converts it to its own operating frequency, and outputs that energy like Saturn's rings at the equator, like a laser. So absorbs in 3 dimensions, but outputs only in two dimensions. So like a ring. So the magnets are a means to facilitate the flow as a wave. The core is a means to absorb the energy, of which there is an electron capture effect of lanthanides. That is no scientific literature yet either. It's undiscovered. When people discovered that, lanthanum and neodymium and dysprosium and all of these, samarium, all these rare earth elements, they're going to shoot up in price. Remember that in like 10, 15 years. So you need the rare earth lanthanides, you need the dielectric, you need the magnetic, and then you need the copper, the OFHC copper, the oxygen-free high conductivity copper, which is usually used for like cryodynamics or space experiments, because you need to have no impurities in it. And the sharper that you have everything built coherently, the sharper the electric response. So you have to machine these things to the proper density, and that is okay. As an analogy, it's like a tuning fork. A tuning fork is a certain size and a certain material, like steel. If you want to hit a 432 hertz note with a tuning fork, you have to have it a specific size and density. If you make it of pure gold, you can still have it hit a 432A note, but it's not going to be the same size as the steel one. If you make it out of uranium, it's going to be even smaller. So the same concept with this technology, it's based on density. So a 15 kilowatt unit that can power your house will weigh 180 pounds and be about 3 feet in diameter, standing 4 inches tall. And you can scale up that from there. And it's like a tuning fork. The magnetic field is resonating once in motion. But there's other factors here. Magnets and copper next to each other in motion, they want to repel because of eddy currents. Normally, the industry treats that as a menace and they try to get rid of it. But in this configuration for this device, this 3-ringed device, and I have pictures and stuff too, and other things that would.
Sure. If you've got a video too, I've got several of them loaded up. I couldn't load all of the presentation videos that you sent.
Just have the links available for people, so when they're going through the presentation, they can click on the links and then follow along, and then or maybe after they can go through it. The point is that these magnetic waveforms interact with the eddy currents to create frictionless magnetic bearings. So the parts orbit the stator. You have to have relative motion in order to generate electricity. One thing moving against a coil. So you have incoming energy. Lorentz force forces these rollers to orbit, but as they orbit, they're creating a signal, and that signal interacts with the copper, which then pushes them away from the copper to create a magnetic bearing. So then they're accelerating and they're producing electricity while they're having no friction. and you can tap that. So it's like a homopolar motor that you can tap as a generator, because the energy is being absorbed from all around it, and there's more force of energy coming. It's an asymmetric electron absorption to emission. So you have electrons coming in 3 dimensions, but only coming out in 2 dimensions. So there's an entire orthogonal axis of kinetic energy being restricted to flow in 2 dimensions like a laser beam. But it's not light, it's electricity. And it behaves like light. So
Right.
It's a completely novel way of generating electricity without need for oil, gas, and all this stuff. It's just harnessing the radiation from that's around us, and then drops the temperature as a result. And then the sun replenishes that, and you can draw some more.
That's interesting. And as you said, it absorbs the energy. In other words, the surrounding ambient heat is absorbed, and therefore the device cools as opposed to heats up. Is that right, to put it that way?
Correct. It's correct. Heat, by definition, is the incoherence of electrons in 3 dimensions. But that same energy present, flowing like a wave, can't have heat. So you have that same amount of energy, but on one plane, flowing like a laser without heat, like a Bose-Einstein condensate. So it's not just static in 3 dimensions. It's a current in 2 dimensions. It's a coherent current, and that is a new concept electrically. All electricity is made or generated by either depleting a finite source, and when that's done, that's it, like a battery. You fill a battery with juice, it's done, no more. Or you can shake the electrons in place like Nikola Tesla alternating current. Boom, 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 boom.
Mhm.
John Searl discovered a way to bring in new electrons at a given rate and in a wave-like manner as old ones are leaving. But they're coming in 3D and leaving in 2D, meaning just in a ring.
Right.
So that's the whole point. Is it's extracting the incoherence and chaos from all around us that we take for granted as temperature, not heat, and then it extracts that energy, and then by doing so lowers the temperature.
I find that fascinating. We've done a little bit of research with stator-like devices as well, and very interesting effects can come from those. Now, regarding the magnets and the magnet charging system that you built for 2 years, are you able to tune these magnets to any specific frequencies? Is
Yes.
it totally customizable?
It totally customizable.
That's really cool. That's really
Not
cool.
only that, but you can, there's, well, I don't want to get too into it, but yes, you can tune to any frequency and combinations, and it's just an entire branch of electrical engineering that needs to be studied and supported more. This project should be getting funding equal to NASA or SpaceX or CERN. It's
if people had smarter heads, in government and other places, that would be the case. But unfortunately, we have to, smash through the large hard-on colliders of the world to get noticed for anything. But that's an interesting thing you talk about. I was just curious. I'm thinking of how you could almost tune magnets in fifths, like music, and actually have a device that has multiple different tunings of magnets that are all like harmonic fifths of each other. What would that do? These are the kinds of questions that, could really.
That's what John Searl called plate charge, meaning different devices would have their own magnetic waveforms on them, which would produce their own signature. And John said if cars were powered by this, and they have their own signature, you could pull out onto the freeway and somebody going 80 miles an hour, they could not hit you because of the difference in signatures. So one would slow down and just move around you. That would just, they could, like
It's sort of like
magnets.
planets. They have their respective orbits and they don't go crashing into each other. Everything's very ordered in the universe as opposed to chaotic. But yeah,
Well,
that's fascinating.
even if you have an asteroid coming through that ordered state in a superconductive state, and you have a coherent enough field, everything of less mass will be pushed away from you. And if something has more mass, then you're just going to move away from it.
I see. Yeah.
Like you could fly a disc at a building, and the building has more mass than the craft, so the craft would just go around. You couldn't crash.
Gotcha. Well, then the insurance companies would be out of business. You see.
Yes.
So yeah, this is really cool. It's in the realm of alternative energy. Everything is possible, and all things must change in order to accommodate it. What kind of pushback have you gotten over these years? I know you probably rely a lot on private funding. Have you sought the public realm, any kind of public-private partnership, things like that could help get this off the ground?
Yes, did that for years. And unfortunately, the public at the time demonstrated that it doesn't care. So the way that the company is structured corporately, only accredited investors can purchase shares in the company in order to fund it. Can't do the crowdsourcing, can't do the Kickstarter, and that's all for nonprofit 501c3s. This is a 506 corporation. The reason why we reformulated it as a 506 is because we tried doing those other avenues before. After hundreds of people said, hey, we'll fund you. Oh, we just want an avenue and a means to do so. We'll contribute. So, okay, so we did it, called the bluff, and after 3 months of doing campaigns and stuff, a total of $1,500 was raised for a $3 million project. Like,
right?
Okay, obviously the public doesn't care, or they don't, because they don't know it exists. But now at this point, the only way to do it is if you're accredited investors, but not everybody can fund it. We don't want just anybody to fund it, because you have voting rights in a company when you purchase shares. So you want to have angel investors and people who are of sound mind and heart, who aren't going to be corrupt later. So you have to vet people who can even invest. It's not just like a publicly traded company. That comes in the future once you have a product or service to offer.
Is the 506 model also required to have a board of directors and such to operate?
I believe so, but that's handled intra-company with you can put any hats and labels as you want on people, and then designate that for the annual minutes and the corporate, because we do that every year. We have a company meeting and then do that and have to fulfill the duties of a corporation legally, which a lot of other ones don't, apparently.
Right. Yeah. NGOs and other things, we're in the wrong business, right?
Yeah, we're too honest. It's crazy.
Yeah, get that Soros funding. Big moolah.
No, I still wouldn't even do it. No.
I hear you, right? All right, cool, man. So the big $1 million question, do you currently, or do you expect to in the near future, have any product available? Is anything being offered, or are you still in a R&D phase?
The R&D phase, we're currently in R&D phase, and that is a $3 million project in order to develop a manufacturer's prototype, as John Searl originally did. But again, that's like, we've had to build up the infrastructure for over a decade in order to be able to do the work. So now we have this very elaborate facility to be specific to these materials that are in this device. And I have personally done years of repetitive machining to learn the process. So I would act as an operations manager when we hire real engineers and real materials experts and chemists and electric. So I'm just wearing those hats for now, trying to do the work so that we know what to tell these people once we hire them. And that's what we've done. So now there's no technological hurdles, only a lack of funding. And I would act as the director to tell the personnel what to do and how to do it. And that's the goal. And it would take about 18 months full-time work with $3 million. This has been the same repeated line since 2010. John Searl said, you better have at least 3 million in the bank to account for unforeseen problems and for your budget. That's pennies compared to the billions and trillions they print out of thin air. So,
yeah, and then some.
So yeah, so this is a very worthwhile, and there's justification to do so because we have all of these demonstration mock-ups and proofs of concept to isolate the different claims of John Searl. Okay, John Searl said they will spin all in one direction and all be evenly spaced. Okay, we built that up. Okay, that's true. John Searl said they will spin on their axis as they orbit. Okay, that's true. John Searl says that they will fly as they orbit around the stator. So we had to build another thing. Okay, the eddy currents, they develop a frictionless bearing. That's true. Everything that we have done has justified further investigation and further funding. But people don't know about the technology. So in order to push it over that hurdle, it's a $3 million project. And that's big claims. So that is the difficulty in getting the funding is, everybody says, once you build it, then we'll fund you. So that once you provide us with that final result, then we'll give you the money that you need. But until then, good luck. That's not how it works, man. Paradox.
Right. Well, hey, real quick, let's roll a video, give a little bit of background. This is a video I just renamed to Overview. So we're going to take a look at a little bit of what goes on at SEGmagnetics.com. Be right back.
For generations, the way we've produced electricity has released emissions into our atmosphere, leading to harmful pollution. As we near a shortage of affordable fossil fuels, we are facing an energy crisis. But what if there was a clean source of energy that was not only efficient, but completely renewable? Imagine a sustainable energy source for your home that could save you tons of money on your electricity bill each month. One that would protect you from power outages. If you knew of something like this, would you keep your neighbors in the dark? Of course not. Now, what if your neighborhood shared this with the people around them? We could power entire city blocks, and soon enough, an entire country. Now, what if we were able to share this technology with the rest of the world, in remote locations where no power exists, or in developing nations with limited resources? Wouldn't the world be a better place? Wouldn't our planet shine brighter? What if you didn't have to imagine all of this? What if it was already possible? The SEG made available to you by Universal Energy is a clean, simple, sustainable solution to our energy crisis. The SEG works by drawing in and recycling free-floating electrons that are naturally occurring all around us in every environment. Once positively charged, the SEG draws in kinetically active electrons. The drawing in and emitting of electrons naturally forms the torus, which pushes the circular magnets of the SEG. We then convert the motion into electricity, same as every turbine, to power homes, businesses, cities, and beyond. Just like a traditional turbine, whether it's wind or a hydroelectric water dam, the SEG harnesses physical motion to produce electricity. The best part is that it takes nothing from our Earth's resources and leaves nothing harmful behind. In fact, the SEG's electron recycling process could help strengthen our Earth's atmosphere and clean our air. So it's not a question of whether it's possible. The question is, do you want to help clean up our planet by using affordable, renewable energy?
Very cool. Yeah, let's get it going. The one main thing I think a lot of people have to feel before they really start looking at these alternative energy production models, systems, things that are ongoing in terms of research and development of such ideas is they have to feel a little pain from the gas pump, from the electric company. These are the things that I think, and I've looked at this for a long time. Why is it the human race is so hesitant to change? We're going off into philosophy now, but I think it's a big part of understanding why these things have not been already developed as they should have been decades ago, and they should never have even been shut down. But as we know, the greed of man is much stronger than the need for sharing new technology, which could basically make people independent, give them the ability to live anywhere on the planet that they choose, because they could generate their own power and heat, which would make them self-sufficient. And this is the big fear. And I think if we just take into account what happened in East Palestine, Ohio, and how they chose to, rather than collect the vinyl that was all over the ground, they just chose to light it on fire so that they could get the rail line open quicker. Somebody's ass is on the line for that. They just haven't found out who ordered it yet, or they're hiding it very well, but it will come out eventually. But it's that kind of mentality that you're really dealing with. The roadblock here for humanity is, as you said, people just aren't interested. But if enough pain, if the electric bills get high enough, and necessity being the mother and father of all invention, when things get painful enough, I think that sort of is what opens the door for possibility. But what are your thoughts on that? And where do you see us going? How long do you think it's going to take? Or do we just need to keep chiseling at this wall of ignorance until we make a breakthrough and are eventually able to get this stuff out there?
There is nothing that we cannot solve within a generation, given that enough people pay attention and work collectively. But it doesn't need to be everybody. As Margaret Mead said, it only takes a small group of people to affect really good things. I bastardized that quote really badly, but never forget that it only takes a small group of people in order to pulling a Biden here. Goddamn it.
To change the world, indeed, that's all that ever has.
Yes,
is a small
correct.
group.
Correct.
Right.
A small group of people to enact change. And that's why I made some of these flyers here, is to hand them to people directly, leave them at gas stations, at supermarkets, and pretty much everywhere I go, to try to get people to pay attention, to look at that little QR code, to the Google link, Google Doc that I have with all of these different explanations to alternatives and the justification for them. A lot of people have trouble with the alternative energy because of math, and most math is using Lorentz transformations, which that's what relativity uses. But math is not an end-all be-all for an explanation of a scenario. You can have the same scenario being described in different ways and two different sets of math to explain it, which are conflicting. So people need to understand that there are Galilean transformations and mathematical equivalent solutions that can derive the justification for all of these technologies, but it's not going to be under relativity. And the scientific community has a duty to look into and study different models that can yield the same predictions and solutions as any other model. So that's the whole deal, is that math is not an end-all be-all. It's just an explanation for a given scenario. But scenarios can be explained in different ways. So that's when I found the work of Dr. Edward Dowdy and Peter Beckman, trying to find alternative mathematical solutions to explain these technologies. And
that's a question I had for you. Give us a little bit of background on Mr. Dowdy. Seems an interesting fellow.
Dr. Edward Dowdy was a man who, in 1991, wrote this book, The Extinction Shift Principle, and it deals with elementary math replacing relativity. All relativity models deal with some luminiferous ether media or a fourth dimension in space-time having to ripple in order to propagate light and generate gravity between planets. Dr. Dowdy reformulated classical physics equations to show you do not need any fourth dimension. You do not need any ether at all. You don't need any media. And it's simply the absorption and re-emission of electrons from different frames of reference, not a deforming fourth dimension in the same frame of reference, not a deforming ether in the same frame of reference. Absorption and emission, different frames of reference. So Einstein said, if the velocity of light is even a tiny bit dependent upon the velocity of the light source, then my entire theory of relativity and gravitation is false.
Mm.
And that's what this guy did. And that's what Peter Beckman and Dr. Dowdy is an ex-NASA retiree, an engineer, electrical engineer, a mathematics professor at multiple universities. He is an expert in atomic physics, optics, lasers, and satellites. He built the satellite system and neodymium, the YAG lasers for the testing of the polar ice caps and the atmosphere of Venus and deflection of radio pulses from quasars. This guy built the satellites and laser systems that tested all of that for NASA. And he's the one who developed this book saying that, there's no gravitational lensing. There is no need for relativity. There's no dark matter, no black holes, like no need for no Big Bang. It's
Wow.
like a completely different interpretation. And this guy is legit.
Give us the name of that book one more time for listeners.
Yeah, it is The Extinction Shift Principle, Discourses and Mathematical Illustrations. And again, if you don't, natural laws only, no ether, no Lorentz transform, no contractions, no time dilation, none of that. And the consequences of this are so catastrophically devastating to astrophysics and to the scientific community. We have to do another show because your last expose on the fourth dimension and time itself was one of my favorites that you have ever put out because it deals with this information and how time is constant everywhere for everyone.
Right. That seemed timely. I'm really glad you liked it because it has a lot of levels to it, but the whole Einsteinian time as a fourth dimension, you have so many people, very intelligent, smart people that have come out, not only proven it to be, for instance, you stupid relativists. yeah, there you go.
Oh yeah, even Bill Gates. I don't even like that guy. But
I know.
He has a good perspective there. He does.
He does. Minus the rope theory, I can live without the strings, right? But anyways, and then you got the Stephen Crothers of the world who have shown that the black hole, lunacy and the Big Bang lunacy, and of course that gets us into this more again. It's a science of ego. And who are the grandstanders on the stage that get promoted like religious figures when there's really incredible, like this Mr. Dowd here, I'm sure when you say he's approaching it from absorption to what's its opposite, emission, which is very similar to a Russell, which is compression expansion, which is, again, it's the breathing cycle. Things breathe. So why don't we look at this universe in two ways as opposed to just this one-way idea? And I've got to say that the two-way idea was first kicked around with the Universal One's release in a serious way back in 1926. And within 5 years of the Universal One two-way universe being released to mankind through 700 prominent scientists and 300 universities, 1,000 copies. Within 5 years, the Catholic Church releases its Jesuit priest, Georges Lemaitre, and a one-way heat, death, dying universe model, as if they were trying to, oh my God, the seed of a two-way universe has now been planted. We've got to obfuscate that. So they actually threatened Russell with the Pope threatened to issue a decree if he was ever going to reprint that book. And we found paperwork in the archives to support that. And he actually tells the story in a video. The Pope threatened to issue a decree if I reprinted that book. So that's why he really never reprinted it. And isn't that amazing? So it's my opinion, being, someone who worked in the Russell field for a long time, that the Catholic Church was in damage mode, damage control, which is why they came up with this ludicrous one-way heat, death, dying universe model just 5 years after a two-way model was introduced and began to gain steam. So yeah, these great minds, it's the same old story over and over. I'm curious about Mr. Dowdy. Did you say he was ex-NASA?
Yeah, he was a retired NASA engineer and physicist.
How was he received when he put that book out? Was that his first kind of going against the grain, or was he known for that? Or how was the reception from his colleagues when he put out a book saying that, you don't need the fourth dimension and you don't need these things to explain the motions of light?
I'm not sure when he first put it out, but he earned the respect of very high credible physicists in his field and at universities because of his high caliber credentials. So it's not just like some guy like me, sitting in a room talking about this stuff. This guy, I'm talking about his work that he actually did. This guy had more qualifications than Einstein and many of these guys combined. So his work was actually well received because he had such a high respect for Einstein. But so what he said is that relativity was the only method for over 100 years that could actually predict the perihelion of Mercury and a binary pulsar 1913 and 1916 and all these different physics problems that elementary classic physics could not solve back then, not with a luminiferous ether or any other method. Relativity was the only method that actually created an artifice and a fake scenario in a fourth dimension that you could sweep all those problems under the rug using metric tensors. And it actually yielded the same predictions and solutions as nature's actual processes. Like, wow. Whether Einstein stole that from Paul Gerber and Rudolf Boskovic and other people, the method itself indeed does yield the proper predictions and solutions for these scenarios that were not solvable back then. Until 1987 with Peter Beckman, and until 1991 with Dr. Edward Dowdy, when they reformulated the concept of rather having to distort a fourth dimension or an ether, you don't need distortion at all. It's just the absorption and emission and re-emission in a wave-like manner, rather than actual ripples propagating. So Walter Russell said light does not travel. It reciprocates and repeats from wave field to wave field. And what Edward Dowdy is saying is that the same light does not propagate. The sun and the heat and light that comes from the sun is not the same heat and light that comes into your eyes. There is no heat and light between the planets. The electrons making up Earth absorb that energy and re-emit it, producing the heat and light at the interference itself. And then your eyes make it absorb that. So it's like the primary light comes in from the sun, it gets extinct, and then shifted to a brand new secondary wave packet. And then your eyes absorb that secondary, diminishes to zero, and reproduces a third one, which then your brain interprets. So it's not the same light from any given source. And that's the whole point of this model, is that you can never see the original light from any source. It's not the same light bouncing off of a mirror and ricocheting. Light does not ricochet. It's a brand new light at every point of interference. And every point of interference is a new frame of reference if that frame of reference is moving towards or away from you. So the velocity of light is dependent upon the velocity of the light source.
Wanted to ask you about that in specific. I saw that you mentioned that in one of your writings. Light does not ricochet. Let's go into that just a little bit more.
So light light is neither a particle nor a wave. It is a constant from its source. But by the time you interpret that source, it's now in a wave-like manner being pulsating from your own electrons. All the light you ever see is the re-emitted light from the electrons making up yourself. All the gravity you ever feel is the re-emitted gravity from the electrons making up yourself. It's not the same light, not the same gravity. So when you point a laser beam or point a flashlight at a mirror, that primary light goes out, and then the electrons making up the surface of the mirror absorb it. This is the primary light. Brand new secondary light. And that happens at the velocity of light, at the rate of c. So serving the illusion that the same light bounced back, but it's never the same light. So it's like a seesaw at the rate of c. Incoming primary, outgoing secondary as an equal and opposite reaction. All of relativity and quantum mechanics and these different models say it's the same light bouncing around forever, being distorted and continuing on within the same frame of reference. It's a brand new light at different frames of reference at every point of interference. So the light from a distant galaxy comes to our galaxy, gets extinguished by the atmosphere of our galaxy, like the cloudy intergalactic media. And then now that's a secondary light from the reference of our own galaxy. And then our solar system absorbs that. And now we have the brand new light from the entire galaxy being re-emitted from our frame of reference from our solar system. And then our planet absorbs that from its own frame of reference and re-emits that. So every observer observes the illusion that the velocity of light is the same to everybody, because every observer is only observing their own light from themselves. The light of one,
right.
The one reality that we all share. And same with time. Time does not distort. Time is the same to everyone throughout the universe simultaneously, not like the movie Interstellar. It's
right.
the
I have
same
to agree.
to everybody.
Absolutely.
Oh, at one point on that, if you have two twins at Earth and they start repeating a mantra together, one of them leaves at light speed for 30 years and then they come back and they meet after 30 years, they will have said the same number of mantras, yet their two clocks will be drastically different. And the two twins won't even look alike. One of them will look younger. Why? Because one of them decomposed and degraded here on Earth at a faster rate than the one in space. Not that they're older, they look different, and they would have said the same mantras. So there are tests that can be done with lasers over far enough distances that I've written about in diagrams. So I need funding in order to make 3D visualizations and then further do these things. But these are very credible, valid alternatives that people have never encountered before. And they're explainable.
Well, we're going to put up all your links, and I encourage people to check out more of it. Absolutely fantastic. I have to ask, being different schools, the two of us, but yet both open-minded toward new ideas, which to me that's going to be the saving grace of humanity, is to have, as they say, an open mind, but not so much that your brain falls out, like when you go severely left on the political spectrum. What is your definition of an electron? How would you most closely define it? Just for my point of view, I'm curious.
Actually, let me get a book here.
You got it.
There you go. This is one of the best books I have read recently. That was recently published.
The Nature of the Atom.
Nature of the Atom. It is put together by a group of chemists and physicists that put this teamwork together, and it deals with electron energy inside the atom and externally, that it is a sphere of energy that extends past the atom. Fermions are particles, but electron energy is emitted by those particles. I like the atomic model more like Nicholas Fatio or Georges Lesage, which said that there are particles, fine matter, and ultrafine matter. way smaller than what Max Planck's models would allow. And Max Planck, even though he contributed a lot to science, from what I understand, falsified his results of black body radiation with his friend Gustav Kirchhoff, which became the basis of quantum theory, which then they put these arbitrary constraints of limits on scale of the Planck length, Planck time, Planck temp, and Planck mass.
Right.
But those are just arbitrary limits. And I think there are particles much smaller than that acting as building blocks, that there is no particle wave duality, but rather particles emit and absorb and retain energy. And it takes energy in that process to collect them, and it releases energy upon their disintegration. Energy and influence by which light and gravity and all radiation is able to manifest or be emitted and influenced within a vicinity, which drops off according to the inverse square. But the electron itself, I don't think, is an orbiting ball electron particle. I think it is a massless energy that can induce work. And there's no real definition of it yet because it's undefined. All these atomic models have been trying, Mendeleev with his table, and Rutherford, and then Bohr, and all these different guys. But Walter Russell was talking about the 24 substances that precede hydrogen.
21, yep.
21 substances, sorry. And this book can help to, let me see if I can get to any specific page with a model on here. It just deals with spheres like ball magnets coming together. And there is no neutron in this model, but rather only a collection of protons and electrons which cancel out each other's charge to produce what they call a neutron. The model is not finalized or solved by any means. It has a lot of way to evolve, but it is another model that can help explain these dynamics without needing the orbiting ball electron and all of the fanciful models that are still depicted in textbooks today, that have been abandoned, yet they still depict them.
Yeah, indeed. Have you seen Erwin Mueller's microscopy photographs of tungsten atoms?
No, I don't believe I have.
Okay, I'm going to pull that up, but real quick while I'm doing that, I'll just, regarding that book, The Nature of the Atom, you said models. That's the important thing to remember here, folks, is that everything we're using is more or less a model until a better model comes along to replace it. I mean, that's the whole of human growth and progression, especially when it comes to science. There is no final, and that's the problem. A lot of us alternative researchers, Jason, I know you had problems with their so-called laws, right? Perhaps calling these things laws were a little bit premature, especially for bad boys. We like to break laws when it comes to that. But I know from the very first time we met that we were both interested in seeing this scientific paradigm be upgraded. And if it needs to be torn down in order to upgrade it, so be it. But that's going to lead me into our next discussion, which is, of course, related. But your thoughts on that monstrosity. You can't use the word monster enough to describe the Large Hadron Collider, or my fancy term for it. But the pencil pushers there, and to me, they would seem to do better as far as results go if they ram their own heads together at light speed. They might get more out of the process. But can you just give us what is your overview of the Large Hadron Collider? I know there's not a lot of people out there that really can critique it because they don't know a whole lot about it. I know that they're smashing particles together at light speed and then collecting the emissions in bubble chambers, naming those things particles that only have like 1/15,000th of a second of life. And they're looking at that and going, now we've seen the Higgs boson or the the particle that accounts for, the creation of the universe, which is ludicrous. What they're seeing is a high energy dissipation, which is way beyond plutonium. 92 electrons or rings are emitted from a plutonium particle constantly because it's so rapidly unwinding and it's a very high frequency. Anything that's beyond that is going to deteriorate even at a faster pace. So to think of that, they could capture this stuff and use it as an energy source when they've already failed so much with the nuclear fission end of this whole thing, and how it's just dangerous to use in the first place. What are your thoughts on that? And just give us the Verbelli's own opinion about the Large Hadron Collider.
The Large Hadron Collider, and then the Higgs boson.
Yeah, exactly.
This book, I happen to have a stack of books here, man. It says, awesome, I get to pick them.
Love it.
The Higgs fake, Alexander Unzicker.
Writing that one down.
Yeah, this is, yeah. I'll send you some other links too. These, actually, this other guy too, the Beeb Day, talk about the falsifiers.
Oh yeah, he's a. I wonder if he's still around.
Yeah, I think he's still alive. I've been trying to find his email.
I don't think his site's been updated in quite a while. But
no, it hasn't. But even Dr. Downey was saying that under the framework of Galilean transformations, mass remains constant. It does not fluctuate like relativity suggests. So he says there is a particle accelerator illusion and effect where the walls of the containment system are acting on the particles contained therein. So as they ramp up their power, the particles are feeling more resistance from the re-emission of that energy from the walls of the chamber itself. And they are confusing that as the mass is increasing its velocity. They think it's increasing mass, but really it's the increasing potential by which the particles are flowing through or around. So I use the analogy of waving your hand underwater. You feel the resistance. It's not that your hand is gaining mass when you're moving it back and forth. There's an actual media that's there that's creating resistance. So that's what's happening between the walls of the containment. And then they're misapplying that logic into open space in the void, thinking that there are mass fluctuations of particles as they increase their velocity and acceleration. But there is no mass increase. It's an illusion. And every time they're smashing things together and fragmenting them, it's releasing the energy contained therein. Not that it's interchanging and converting to matter, converting to energy, but these pieces of fragmented shrapnel, they're naming new particles and new bits with each fleeting effect that they have. And it's just on a micro, nano, pico, femto scale on just, the smallest little bit on the smallest little time. Things that John Searl's technology can yield at a macro scale at a constant. These guys are trying to do for billions of tax dollars in 17-mile ring when you can be doing this on your tabletop to power houses. There was a man named Dr. Paul Brown who developed what's called the resonant nuclear battery. And he claimed to discover a way to extract 100,000 times more energy from a radioactive material than current nuclear science says is possible. Using a gram of strontium-90, or even just a needle of strontium-90, which is radioactive, it has a half-life of 28 years. This guy's method can turn that material into a 28-year battery. Instead of getting 0.063 watts of power out of that 1 gram of material, Dr. Brown found a way to get 7,500 watts out of the same material. Without needing to refine the plutonium, you can use the spent fuel rods to harness that. So they're spending billions of tax dollars to try to yield results on such a small scale for such a fleeting amount of time, and then claiming huge success with that. Every test that they do, they say they validate themselves, which justifies more funding for them. And it's just it's a fake. It's a scam. And Alexander Unzicker wrote another book called Bankrupting Physics. Have that one on the bottom of the pile there, to talk about this exact wild goose chase, that they are mischaracterizing the observations and experiments, which then they are using to justify their own claims to get more funding. But it's all misinterpretations, illusions of observations, and just straight up fraud in some cases.
Right. I mean, it's telling when the most people know about it is they think it opens portals to another dimension.
Oh, Jesus.
I mean, if that isn't, applying absolute woo-woo to something that, they can't really explain to begin with. But nobody from CERN seems to mind that characterization, that their little experiment creates a ring in the sky, which, as above, so below, sort of a mere effect. Yeah, that's fine.
I've had a joke about that for a while, man. All this talk about black holes, white holes, and wormholes. The only holes in nature are pink, but these nerds wouldn't know anything about that.
I couldn't said it better myself, brother. Yeah, the pencil pushers, man. You could get more out of yourselves if you rammed your own heads together at light speed. So, yeah, that's wild. I was able to pull up Edwin Mueller. So Edwin Mueller created what's called field ion microscopy. And I'm going to get the share screen on here. So give me just a second. But he took some of the first photos of actual tungsten atoms. And so I'm going to pull up one of these photos here. And as you can see, the tungsten atom, as you said, there's no neutron there, right?
Well, the neutron could be a collection of protons and electrons to cancel each other out. So it could have a particle there that's neutral, but it's not like its own particle. It's a collection of other neutralized charges.
I'm just going to draw to a reference with Walter Russell. He said the spiraling element chart that he drew showed that all elements preceding hydrogen had open holes in the center. In other words, they were places of reversal, you could say, or neutral planes, let's just call it that. And then anything beyond carbon also had a hole in it that unwound. So prior to carbon is a winding up and a closing of the hole of all the elements preceding it. And after carbon is an opening of the hole to throw more rings off in all of the elements that come post-carbon. But I just found that to be very interesting when you take this into account. Here's another great photo here. If I can get this to open. It just shows you how in tungsten itself, you have the rings around each of these so-called atoms and how they're really not separate. They're all uniform, but they each have that hole in the middle. Let me see if I can find a couple more here. These are actual photos of atoms, which is a real rarity to see, But I recommend that book for anybody, Field Ion Microscopy by Erwin Mueller, Meuller. So what are your thoughts on this? Oh, here's that pic I like of you. You sent me that a long time ago. Now that's a badass lab. Is that you in your actual laboratory? Oh, you're muted. Oh, hang on a second. I got to unshare.
Oh,
there we go.
There we go.
Was that you in your lab?
No, that was me. That was me.
That's awesome. And that's your laboratory.
No, that's not my laboratory, but rather the company laboratory that the investors have helped to build up, and that I built that magnetizer over 2.5 years with my boss Fernando Morris. Give background to my boss Fernando. Fernando was involved with IBM for many years, and he was working during the Reagan administration for the SDI program and the Star Wars satellite. He was doing the satellite communications. When NASA and IBM couldn't figure out a problem, they would call in Fernando to troubleshoot and figure it out. So he saw John Searl's technology and he was like, wait a minute, this is really interesting here. He left IBM to fully dedicate himself to pursue John Searl's project and start this company, because he saw so much validity in the electrical engineering, and left his cushy position at IBM working on like, this is, so that says a lot also. And that's who I am now under the wing of, is Fernando Morris. So he's ahead of the project. He's really like Dr. Frankenstein. I'm just like Igor in the lab helping him out and learning and being able to articulate these things to others.
That's really cool. So what made him want to get into that?
The book, Ether Technology. It was a yellow book, and it talked about these alternative energy technologies and John Searl. When he first heard about John Searl in like the 80s, he thought John Searl was already dead. Then he learned he was alive. He's like, oh my God. He started communicating with him. He built his own magnetizer with like 12 car batteries in series in his garage, like 70 volts and like thousands of amps. It's ridiculous. This stuff will kill you if you press the wrong switch, you know? So he was validating this in his house, and so, okay, there's something to this. And then communicated with John Searl, and ended up saving John's life multiple times, getting him heart surgeries. John Searl fell. He was living by himself. He would report every morning. He never reported the one morning. Uh-oh, something's wrong. Called the cops there. Sure enough, he needed help. Just like supported this man for so many years. Like if it wasn't for Fernando Morris, John Searl wouldn't have even have lived to be 86 years old. Like he died in San Diego, John Searl, in 2018, December 4th, and left us the means to finish and continue his legacy, which had never been done with any other group before. And that is extremely significant, because now we have validated the magnetization process, repeated it, and people just need to know about it and support it. If people claim they want green energy, this is
the real green.
This is it.
Not the windmill green, but the actual real green. Yeah. Fascinating. The same thing here. We worked in the lab, Darren Colomb and I, and in our work with Russell's, technology applications, we were able to validate and actually see some actual laws of physics invalidated at the same time. Lenz's law, second law of thermodynamics, things of that nature. And that's what, when somebody says perhaps calling these things laws were a little premature, it's not because we're just making things up, but there's a certain way that you have to apply this technology. I really appreciate that you're carrying on a legacy. I know exactly, I could say, I understand very much what it's like to, put your life kind of on hold and really work hard to want to validate, want to protect and preserve another's legacy. I mean, thus the old saying, we all stand on the shoulders of giants, and we hope to become giants ourselves one day, but certainly protecting a legacy of someone like a Searl or a Russell or a Tesla or a Schauberger or a Murray, these are certain requirements must be met. And have you, or during your time as working for SEG Magnetics, did you ever have anybody try to, let's just say, throw a monkey wrench or divert or further distort or try to unpreserve Searl's work? Have you had any kinds of issues with that?
Yeah, you see my eye twitching. Yeah, yeah. We had some investors who turned out to be kind of dirty. This is kind of weird. You remember I mentioned that Dr. Paul Brown guy who developed the resonant nuclear battery? The guys who were formerly working with him decades ago, Dr. Paul Brown developed his own SEG with strontium-90 and neodymium. He tried communicating with John Searl over 13 letters over the course of years in the mid-'80s. And John never replied to him because he had gotten robbed and his life was being destroyed. yet another guy trying to steal his work. No, I'm not communicating with him. But this guy, Paul Brown, developed that. The guys who were working with Paul Brown at the time saw this device develop energy over a megawatt, they claim, and burnt up with the intensity of magnesium. They couldn't even put it out. So that gave them, they said, okay, John Searl is for real. They told Paul Brown to stop working on John Searl stuff, focus on the resonant nuclear battery. And then Paul Brown was murdered like years later and never got to really pick up on the SEG aspect of it. So these guys contacted us saying, we worked with Paul Brown. We see the technology and the validity of this. We want to help you out and invest in the company. So we allowed them in the company to help out and start investing and become the attorney for the company. The guy who was working with Paul. So so there was a huge fallout, and we had to reformulate the company. They tried to get John Searl to sign his rights away, and they tried to collect some of the equipment to bring it to Florida to have their own laboratory because they wanted to save the technology. So having too big of a heart, sabotages things sometimes. So yeah, when we're trying to do something right, goes wrong. So there was a huge fallout there, and then that stifled the efforts for quite some time. And then when investors try to invest in the company now, they look at all that stuff that happened. They say, wait a second, we don't think you have full control. So once you settle that, then we'll help you out. But in order to settle that, you got to go to court, which costs money and it needs funding. So it's like, so there's hurdles and stifling and stuff that's none of which is technological. It's all bureaucracy and politics and crap. So that, and then Fernando was almost murdered. Completely unrelated topic, not like somebody trying to stop the project at all. It was on New Year's in 2020. He was at the office and he heard some commotion in the parking lot. There's a bunch of different not laboratories, but machine shops and people who work on transmissions and all this stuff in the parking lot in the building that we operate out of. And one of the kids, who's like 17 years old, works with his family doing transmissions. He was sleeping in this trailer, this Winnebago, and this crazy guy broke into the Winnebago and had a knife in his hand. And this kid woke up and was like, "Who are you?" This guy said, "You're the devil," and started stabbing this kid in this Winnebago.
Was that Paul Pelosi's buddy?
Yeah. No, a completely different one, man.
Okay.
That was a different buddy of Paul.
All right.
So this kid screaming bloody murder, getting like killed, stabbed, running out into the parking lot. Fernando hears this, and he's like sleeping at like 10 o'clock at night. And wakes up. What the hell is going on? Opens the door. This kid's running at him, like runs behind him, like help. And this crazy dude bum rushes Fernando, knocks his head on the concrete, and starts just pummeling him. There's a fire station a couple 100 yards up the block. Police cars start coming down the block. They start, the police come and they're like, freeze. And rather than freeze and drop the knife, he starts stabbing Fernando in the neck multiple times on the ground. Jesus Christ. So then Fernando goes to the hospital. He, luckily, non-life-threatening. He did have life. They had to sew him back together. So this was extremely traumatizing. I didn't even know this until like a couple of days later when I showed back up at the lab, and I just see his wallet, his shoes, his keys, and his phone in the lab with no Fernando. TV is on, everything's on, and trail of blood leading in the parking lot with them. This horribly ridiculous. I'm like, what happened? And I thought it was, was Men in Black? Did he get kidnapped? I didn't know what the hell happened. So it turned out it was just a completely unrelated psycho incident. Is that what happened with Eugene Malov, with the cold fusion guy? Remember that? Some guy broke into his house and ended up beating him to death. Everybody thought it was like, to stop cold fusion. It could have just been some crazy psycho, completely unrelated. Like, apparently that happens. So, holy cow. Yeah, that was a scary incident, dude. So we're back up and better than ever now. And
So I was going to ask that. How's he doing? Is he coming back and getting back in?
He's great now. Good. Everybody's hyper aware of things now. So it's like, but well, it's not, that almost did it. That was crazy.
It's not too much to be hyper aware these days. You really have to be, especially as things, seemingly keep plunging toward a lower maxim, if you will. We got to be on guard, especially get back into your martial arts. People start working out.
Only so much you can do in a given scenario, but I mean, these are the types of things that whether it's planned or not, it could stifle the process. So it would behoove the world to support this type of thing sooner than later, because we only have a certain amount of time here, regardless. I'm sure a lot of people would have loved to talk to Nikola Tesla if he was alive, right? People would sure love to talk to John Searl now. He's gone, huh? Well, Fernando's still alive. We're still alive. And all these other people are contributing, are still alive. Pay attention to them, support them, and stop focusing on nonsense and printing money out of thin air. If you are going to print money out of thin air, allocate it to these things. Come on.
Yeah, right. Well, that's, again, one of the main pitfalls of humanity is that we tend to get stuck in these go nowhere mindsets. And when you're on the cutting edge, doing the work, protecting the legacy of great inventors, geniuses that have come before us, it behooves us all to look at what is the important thing here. So definitely want to make sure people appreciate what it really takes. And having been a person on the inside who moved 64 tons of art and sculpture that belonged to Walter Russell, and having to set it all up in a museum and take the time and effort, there's a lot of great time and effort that goes into these endeavors that people that do the work of protecting legacies and truly protecting them, not just we've had the same issue in the museum. We had a group come in and they wanted to remove some of the art because it was too white. I'm not kidding. And I wasn't there at the time. This is the following administration, but they said it was too white, too masculine. It was too, yeah. It's like, well, don't you know that plaster, sculptures tend to be white? I mean, what's the deal? And they had all these recommendations and they tried to get the board involved. And I call it, the organization's name was Leaving Normal Behind, but I call it Leaving Reality Behind. So just be careful, folks. There's a lot of people out there and they come from this leftist mindset and they don't understand how important a person's work is. They're the kind of people who would change the paint drops on the Mona Lisa or remove notes from Beethoven's Fifth Symphony because they find them offensive. So just, hats off to guys like you, Jason, who do the work to protect the legacy of a genius like Searl. So back to Searl's work. With this particular invention, have you measured any more, let's say, have you achieved an over unity demonstration to yourself in the lab? Are you still working on that?
No.
How much can you say about that?
First of all, there is no over unity. Over unity applies to the concept of a closed system putting out more than what goes in. You can only pour as much water out from a glass as you pour it in at first. You can only drain a battery with as much as you charge it with first. Very simple concept. But if you're outside during a rainstorm while pouring out the glass of water, then the surrounding environment can contribute more to the glass than what you initially put in. Okay. And at that point, the second law of thermodynamics no longer applies because it is now an open system. Second law of thermodynamics only applies to closed systems. So if you're receiving input from the environment to contribute to the output of the system, it's open because it's receiving matter, exchanging heat and energy with the environment. That's the definition of an open system. So in an open system, you look for a drop in temperature or a lack of heat production. So entropy describes the disorder of a closed system. Neg entropy and syntropy describes the order of a closed system. But this is an open system, and it's dealing with coherence and order. So when you build something and manufacture something consciously, like nanotechnology, when it's in operation, you will find it has a lot more conductivity and a lot more benefits than something of the same material, but not as ordered. So when you consciously order something to a certain degree, and then it's in operation, it will have a coherence as a rest state, and the rest of the incoherent media and everything around it will try to push towards that to disorder it, acting as an electron sink in effect. So you create a state of order. And okay, laser beams do not exist in nature. There are things that humanity can create that does not exist in nature, yet are using nature's laws to manufacture something. So the SEG does not exist in nature, yet it harnesses nature's laws to geometric perfection. And when it does so, and you engineer something and it's geometrically perfect before you even start it up, once you start it up and it's in operation, it will revert back to that state of coherence. It's just like another aspect of Newton's law, but in a brand new interpretation. So this stuff is just so different and so important. All the materials are very specific densities and sizes and have specific functions. And it's just a completely different way of doing things. It just needs to be understood.
There's some amazing stuff you've got on these links. So when I share these links, folks, make sure you guys check it out.
Oh, the other thing, sorry to interrupt. You asked me initially, have I achieved the over unity or even open system conversion? No, not yet. That is the $3 million end result, that the entire focus of the program here. So
gotcha.
To develop those electron emissions and produce power to power something, it requires the absorption of surrounding energy, but you have to magnetize the materials with those waves. You have to make everything to the proper density, and you need a machining process to do that. I've been doing that machining process by hand down to the milligram and micron. So like that's extremely small, tight tolerances. It's not just length, width, and height and outer dimensions. You have to add another aspect of density and weight. So imagine making the same bar of soap, but they all have to be the exact same weight, not just 8 ounces, 8.000000.
Right.
Like, so
to the nanometer.
Yeah. And the more that you account for that, the sharper the electric response.
That's cool. So do you have a link that you can share for people that want to make donations or can go and take a look at your work? Will that be the main
look at the
site?
work? Yes, not make donations, because this again can only
Well,
be funded by
invest.
accredited.
Let's say invest is the right word to use.
Yeah, invest. Only if they are accredited investors and they apply and send a non-disclosure agreement to the company and offer their support. All of the people, the 70 plus investors that have contributed so far, have all offered their financial assistance. Trying to knock on people's doors and convince them about John Searl and gravitational anomalies and powering houses, it doesn't work. It's too much for people to understand and believe. Understandably so. But for those who have done work in exotic areas, aerospace, engineering, electrical engineering, physics, like Dr. Eugene Podklednov, rotating superconductors, they know about John Searl, and they say, okay, they know about his past and the validity and implications of it.
So describe a superconductor real quick for people who may not know what that is.
A superconductor is a material that is, let's see, it's so conductive it has no resistance and no losses to it. So it can, normally they're very, very cold, because when you have resistance and losses, it generates heat. So that's why they pour liquid nitrogen on things to be in a state, not only that a metal can conduct electricity, but it can superconduct electricity so efficiently that there is no losses. And if you were able to keep something cool, it would go indefinitely, not quite perpetually, because there's nothing can last forever in the universe, but it will last longer than your generation, and the next generation can debate on whether it's perpetual. So It'll last that long. So like Hoover Dam has been operating 80 years nonstop as an open system. These superconductors and things like liquid metallic hydrogen and exotic states of matter under extreme pressures that normally need to be kept cool, or it's a lot of work to keep something in a coherent state, because they're starting from a point of incoherence, trying to force the order and then trying to maintain that order. I liken it to the white snow on your TV. No matter how slow, you can watch that white snow in slow motion, it's not going to make order. So chaos in slow motion does not equal order. You have to actually make coherent order consciously. And by doing that, you can generate the superconductivity and have no losses. And that is a huge ordeal in an electrical generation of energy, because you want to be able to generate energy to people long distances with no losses, with no heat.
Sure. Are you guys currently doing anything with superconductivity?
That is okay, there are two modes for this technology. If you're drawing in energy from around you, you can generate electricity and power homes, and that's above superconducting levels. But if you try to absorb too many electrons than the atoms can contain, there will be not a meltdown, but an overload. The loss of electrons from something creates more heat and results in a meltdown. But if you have too many electrons, it results in an overload. So that's when you have these gravitational anomalies and these claims of like, UFO and UAP flying. That's what John Searl did, is that he tried to draw too much energy. It went superconductive and lifted off of his table. And it became a rotating superconductor, absorbing more energy than it could output. And at that point, it went critical, and the Earth repelled it up and away because the system would be lost.
Sort of like you said, holding the ball under the water, and it has to find its equilibrium, which is in space,
to equalize its potential.
Right.
Like a bubble rising. But a bubble does no work to rise. It's the surrounding environment that pushes it up away to equalize its potential. Yep. And anything hitching a ride in or on that bubble does no work. So imagine a collection of electrons. They're not bubbles, but let's liken them to a bunch of nanobubbles, right?
Sure.
You have an impurity in a body of water. The nanobubbles, electrostatically charged, they latch onto the impurity. After a certain point, it changes its buoyancy, and the impurity starts to rise to the surface, having to do no work because it's the surrounding environment acting upon it, because all of the work has already been done. Similar aspect in a superconductive overloaded state. The surrounding environment would act upon the system and push it up and away until it achieved its equalizing potential, and it wouldn't have to do any work because all the work is being done around it and already in the conscious engineering.
Right. Well, that's cool. Wanted to ask too, monopoles. Are there monopoles in nature? Have you ever discovered a monopolar magnet?
No. There's no telling
why or why not?
Okay. A magnet always has two poles, polarity, duality, north and south, male, female, not positive and negative. That's an electric term,
right?
But it's a north and south. When you separate a magnet, you get more norths and souths. You can simulate a monopole. Okay, if you have a magnet and you have a ball bearing, if you bring that ball bearing in the presence of the North Pole and you test that ball bearing, it will be all North Pole. If you bring that ball bearing to the South Pole and you test it, it will be all South Pole, like a monopole. It's not a magnet unto itself because it's being influenced by another quasi-permanent larger
Larcher
field.
will do that too for a ring magnet.
Exactly.
Right.
And, ring magnets are special. They have a different field about them because of their shape. That's why we use them.
Right.
But they're an analog to a magnet is called an electret. The more mass to a magnet, the more powerful it will be. The thinner an electret, the more effective it will be. An electret is like a static electric material that always has static electricity around, like you rub your hair with a balloon, and there's static electricity. Well, imagine a material that always has static. You never need to rub it. It's like always charged. Those materials can self-charge a system through capacitance and through absorption of energy around it. And so magnets never have a single pole. That you can simulate that with, ball bearings and other tricks, but there's no telling what happens in an extremely high pressured state, like the center of a star, where you have coherence that can generate domains and then possibly develop a magnetic field of only one pole. We don't know what happens in that extreme state, but in the natural and our pressure and our environment, there are no magnetic monopoles. Maybe in an extreme high pressure state, though.
Well, that leads me to my next question. I'm setting you up, by the way. Is the Earth flat?
No! Stop it! No!
What is the monopole? No. Monorail.
Jesus. Okay, look. The Earth is not flat, and neither is space. Okay? I get into this argument with people because when I try to challenge relativity...
I had to, brother. I'm sorry. I had to.
So when I challenge relativity, people automatically say, wait a minute. You don't believe relativity? You don't like it? You must believe the Earth is flat.
Right.
Wait a minute.
Right.
The hypocrisy and the irony of that statement is hilarious because relativists believe that space is flat. They believe that space-time curves in the presence of a dense mass and a dense body, but that light propagates in straight lines in between those dense bodies because it's following the flatness of space-time. Follows the curvature of space-time, or it travels flat because it's flat. So they believe the space is flat. Well, space is not flat, neither is the Earth. Stop it. We live in a 3D Euclidean space with 3 planes, 3 axes. Time is not a dimension. It's just, and time is independent of all of those things. It's independent of velocity, of size, of distance, of gravity. It's a constant. And there's very little that is flat within our 3D reality. And the only thing that I could see that has been flat is the soap wall between 2 bubbles. Like
or a block space or domain wall. Yep.
Exactly.
Exactly. I had to throw that out at you, buddy. I'm so glad to hear that you didn't join the camp.
Oh my God.
I'm worried.
I wouldn't be here if that was the case.
Because there's certain reasons that for lack of time we can get into on another show down the road. But I do want to address something that I was just one of the main reasons I had you on was what I heard from you regarding getting shit canned off of YouTube. And I think this owes to more explanation. This is the most ludicrous thing I've ever heard, and just goes to show you how algorithms have zero intelligence, number one. If it was a human that pulled your channel down, it's even more of a stain, for the reason. But give us the reason why. This is very interesting, folks. So listen up to this. You're gonna really scratch your head on this one.
Freaking absolutely pathetic, disgusting, unacceptable BS nonsense. Are you kidding me right now? I woke up at 6 o'clock in the morning to the first 27 notifications from YouTube saying my videos were deleted for medical misinformation specifically.
Yeah, videos on magnetism, videos on electricity.
Not just that. A 1974 lecture of Eric Lathwaite, the guy who invented the maglev train. He was demonstrating gyroscopes, just a gyroscope conference. They labeled it medical misinformation. Drop a magnet down a copper tube to show it, lens law and it's slow motion.
Unbelievable.
Medical misinformation, bro. Showing water in an impeller, medical misinformation. Light through a prism, medical misinformation. Every single video. Then I started getting more notifications. I appealed every single one of them. There's like hundreds.
Oh my God.
I had like 750 videos on YouTube, and every single notification I had was labeled medical misinformation specifically.
Wow.
So I appealed them, and each appeal came back saying a team of YouTube reviewers went over the content and indeed determined that it violated medical misinformation policies. Every single one of them. So, and then my channel got taken down because there was too many strikes. You need 3 strikes, and they the first 27 at 3 in the morning.
Yeah.
So then my second backup channel within 24 hours, all of those videos too. Medical misinformation. I upload the same videos with different titles to make sure they can't be, all of them, same thing. Different ones. So I'm like, so I appealed both channels, and then went on to Twitter, started using Twitter more. Thank God for Elon doing all this stuff and revealing all this stuff. And now I'm using it more, and people are seeing what I've been going through. And so I got a YouTube team help on Twitter. They said, we reviewed your 2 channels, and indeed, you were correctfully terminated.
Wow.
What? So they claim that a team of people at YouTube reviews the content. So it's either a team of people is vindictive and has something against me, or they're lying. They don't have teams of people reviewing. It's just an algorithm. So what are they paying their people to do there? So it's either gross negligence or fraud. No in between. I want my channels back. Even Facebook, when they deleted my page of 15 years, because I posted a meme, of James Franco with the noose around his neck saying first time. They labeled that suicidal content, and they said, seek help or close the page. I couldn't close the page, so I said, okay, seek the help. And then it said, your page has been disabled. You're done. I'm like, what if I really was on the edge? Jeez, they would have pushed me over, man. Luckily, I'm not suicidal and never will be, ever.
Right. Yeah, so remember that. Unbelievable.
So I couldn't believe. So YouTube and Facebook deleted 16 years of uploads, which I moved to Rumble and TikTok of all places. Get this. Even though TikTok is a Chinese regulated site and people are all threatening it for getting shut down because of spying, TikTok has given me more views in a shorter period of time than everything else combined. I might get 1,000 views in 5 years across YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter all together. But on TikTok, I'll get 5,000 views in a night. Like something. So I'm obviously getting censored on some sites. And then I was talking about Schrodinger and how it's exposed that he was a pedophile and booted off of Facebook. Yeah, imagine people who got Schrodinger tattoos and posters in their house. It's like,
what did he do to the cat?
I don't know. He loved kitties, but he loved kitties even more.
Yeah, right.
Like, this guy is out of control. And I talked to the chat GPT too about that. It said, you stop slandering people. So I posted a link and said, I'm sorry for my last comment. It's like, I can only pull up information in 2021. Okay. So yeah, these people are unscrupulous and nefarious, and they're the gatekeepers of the peer reviews. Did you know that Jeffrey Epstein had major pull in the Nobel Society and peer review process?
No, I knew that he was a math and science teacher at the Dalton School.
And Giselle, whatever her name is, Maxwell.
Ghislaine Maxwell, yeah, her dad. Yeah, and. Yeah. Who else? Bill Barr's dad.
I didn't know that one. They're all
Bill Barr's
scientific documents and peer reviews and all this foundational research and stuff. It's crazy.
William Barr. No, not William Barr. Bill Barr's father.
William.
He wrote a book called Space Liaison or something like that about an elite group of space aliens that were going around taking planets hostage and making sex slaves out of the inhabitants of the planets.
Hi, Alex Jones. Hi, Alex.
Yeah, right.
What's up, bro?
I mean, you can't make this stuff up, dude. It's sometimes I do miss Facebook just for the connectivity, and I'm glad I call it a drive-by posting when I go in and just post a just a quick video to pull some people to my latest work. Yeah, here I am. There I go. And it was good to connect with you again, and to know that I really want people to know that, there's no reason to censor somebody unless they pose a threat. And what is Jason's work? Bringing new ideas, new frames of thought, new considerations to the production of electricity, which is what we all need. And if that's a crime, then definitely recommend this guy. You should check out his work because he's going to open your mind in a lot of ways. And, that's starting to look like we're getting toward the point of winding down, brother. But it's really great to take part in this review. Why don't you go ahead and, for our audience, just share, your prominent links that they can find you and maybe latch on to some of your current work. And I'll put all the links in the description below.
So check out the steemit article, steemit.com, STEEMIT. It's like a crypto blog site. It's the only one that I can have like moving animated GIFs on where you can scroll through the article and see context that what I'm talking about. So those articles, the TikTok videos of all the magnetic experiments that I've done with John Searl, that rebirth of classic physics, time, light, and gravity that I put together regarding Dr. Edward Dowdy's work and challenges to relativity. That is absolutely crucial. The SEG article, what is the SEG MockUp and why it's significant? And there's just, my Facebook page, if you want to get in touch with me. I've got restarting a YouTube again, just because I want to be a thorn in their side. But there's lots of means to contact me. Please do, because I'd love to give people all this information for free, of course. It's the only catch. It has to be for free. So
I think there's a blog of you. Is that your current blog? Verbelli.blogspot.com.
Yeah, I'm on near 50 different social media sites trying to get this information out.
Do you have jasonverbelli.com yet?
I have it saved in my domain, but I just haven't actually done anything with it yet.
Okay. So I'm going to encourage you to develop that site and put all 50 of your sites on that one. And then somebody will be able to find you, no doubt. But Jason Verbelli, really great to join you. What kind of things do you got coming down the pipe? Anything that you want to share with the audience? Any presentations coming up?
No, well, I hope to do more presentations. I've been living under a rock for a while, living like a hermit, but now I'd like to start to deliver all this information I've been doing research on, collecting and validating for quite some time. I want to talk about nanobubbles and restoring the biosphere and applications that we can do with that. If anybody wants to form some commercial businesses, let's do it. Make some money and help the world at the same time, because that's the low-hanging fruit, is the nanobubbles. I want to talk about Dr. Dowdy's work and other things too in the future. There's just so much to discuss. And again, there's nothing that we cannot achieve in less than a generation, as long as we pay attention and do it collectively.
That's well said. Well, keep up the great work. Let me know when you guys have the breakthrough, and if I can do something to help in the future, and perhaps our two companies at some point can meet. And
I want to come out there. I want to come out there. And absolutely.
Well, you got to see the Russell Museum, but it is just incredible. And you can check out a video I did too, which is called Rebirth of the Russell Legacy. It's actually still up at YouTube, but it's a 30-minute documentary about having to move all of his stuff, which was, a major task. But again, when you're working toward preserving the legacy of a genius, there's a lot that goes along with that, and being pure and keeping yourself in the secondary spotlight, not taking the spotlight. It's not about us. It's about the work of the great men whose shoulders we stand on, and women. And that kind of humbleness is what it's going to take to really get this stuff out there to the world. Exactly. And we can turn this thing around and make a different kind of world for our grandchildren and children who aren't born yet to come. So
thank you. Very proud of you, and great to connect with you again. Thank you for everybody who's listening. And let's connect.
Sounds great.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone. We'll see you on the next one.